Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, today we'll be talking about Hinduism, not how most people would talk about Hinduism, especially the Muslims. Uh, Muslims have been at odds with Hindus for a very, very long time as we see them as polytheists. So, why am I saying what I'll be talking about is different? Because today I'll be talking about Advaita Vedanta and also its refutation. Muslims have had a unique history with Hindus. Why was it that Al-Biruni said that the scholars of the Hindus were really monotheists? Most of the Muslims today won't even be able to fathom that someone as intellectual as Al-Biruni considered the scholars within the Hindus as monotheistic. So today, this is exactly what we will try to dive into. One of the philosophies of Hinduism that is very widely accepted to this day, and many Hindus themselves consider this to be a monotheistic philosophy. And I will try to show that this is still paganism. So, what is the philosophy? The name of the philosophy is Advaita Vedanta. The philosophy itself literally means no seconds or no dualism. This is a monistic philosophy. We will be breaking down each term as we go along. So, Advaita means non-second or non-dual, and Vedanta means the conclusion. In this case, the conclusions of their Vedas. So that would be the Upanishads. They base their philosophy and try to interpret the Vedas and the Upanishads based on their biased philosophy and metaphysics. So, what is their belief? In their own understanding, Advaita Vedanta is a spiritual philosophy that aims to achieve moksha, or freedom or liberation, or transcendentness. The belief that there are no two things which are existent. Hence, their core philosophy is that existence is the only reality, and this existence is identical to Brahman. Brahman is that which is infinite in space, time, and identity, or is excluded from them. There is no you, me, there is no there, here, there is only is. And moksha is achieved when it is realized that the real self is identical to Brahman itself. So, how do they reach this belief? So, the arguments that they bring forth go something like this. But before we get into those, I would like to say that their reasoning is very similar to the Falasifa. Not all of them, but some of the Falasifa, and some of the Sufiya and the Shiites. That is why we can find refutation indirectly of their philosophy from scholars such as Imam al-Ghazali or Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Maturidi, al-Razi, and many more. May Allah have mercy on them all. The argument goes as, what changes or what is changing is dependent on what is necessary. Similar to the argument from contingency or Darul Imkan, or the argument from possibility, it is somewhat similar to that. So what changes is dependent on what doesn't change. So they would go with a similar argument that what changes is dependent on what doesn't change. This would lead to either an infinite regress or would lead to a unchanging changer in a sense. So they would reach to such a first principle that doesn't change. Now they would look at what doesn't change. So they would give the example of a clay, for example. Clay is made into a pot. A clay can also be made into a sculpture. So the sculpture and the pot, they changed and they came into being, but what remained was the clay. So what didn't change was the clay itself. Similarly, when we look at our real life into reality, we realize the only thing that doesn't change is existence itself. And then they would reach the conclusion that existence is the unchanging thing that is. And from that, they would realize that existence is everywhere and there is no opposite of existence, because the only opposite of existence is non-existence, and non-existence doesn't exist. So the first principle is a unchanging existence that has always existed, non-temporally to be fair, and it is what is present in everything that seems to exist. Now they will take a step further and say this is Brahman. Now how do they justify their scriptures where it says that Brahman, and it gives its attribute that are not identical to the self of Brahman? The way that they interpret is they say that there are two different levels of existence in a sense. One is the Brahman, which is without attributes, which is purely Brahman, which is the existence itself. And then there is one where it talks about Brahman, which is the manifested in the manifestations and the relation with the manifestations. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this, but we have already understood how they define Brahman. So, Brahman is existence itself, and the rest is Maya, or manifestation of this existence. This is, by the way, a very similar philosophy to what Shia say regarding wujud and shaqassasul wujud, or degradation of existence. So we do have a refutation of this philosophy already within our tradition, within the tradition of Ahl-Sunnah wa Jama'ah. So let's get into the refutations. I'll start off by easier refutations, then I'll move on to a bit harder ones. So the first one goes by the fact that their whole argument is based on their senses. It is based on the experience that they get, meaning they see changes, they experience changes, and in the end they conclude that the experience or the senses themselves do not have real existence, rather they are a manifestation. This is a self-refuting philosophy. Take, for example, the analogy that they give. They give the analogy of seeing a snake on your path, but in reality, it is actually a rope. You were mistaken to take it as a snake. This is how they say your senses are mistaken. You see other things as real existence when they're either manifestation. In reality, everything is just existence and the Brahman itself. So if our senses are mistaken, and we can mistake the rope for the snake, or we can mistake the Brahma with other realities, when in reality there is only Brahman and he is the only existence, then if we can question our senses, then the whole argument being based on change is self-refuting, because you need to then question the change itself. Are you really seeing change? No, you aren't. Then how can you know that there is change? How can you then conclude that there is Brahman? Hence, this is the first refutation. The second refutation is existence and attribute are a mental consideration, or identical to the existent. So this might be a second level of an argument. What we mean here is that, is existence something my mind conjures up, or is existence something that is actually out there? Or is existence just what existent is? Is wajud just what mawjud is? We cannot really determine this solely based on rational argumentations. This is a metaphysical assumption. And if this is a metaphysical assumption, then this will lead to a circular argument by the Hindus. The third argument, which will be a quite advanced argument, but I find it to be robust, is the fact that duality is necessitated. If existence is all that exists, then how does the Maya manifest? They will say Maya is identical to existence with its Brahman. Then the question arises, does something manifest? If yes, then which is manifested? Does it exist? If yes, then it is identical to the Brahman. If once again said yes, then it causes itself into existence, which is impossible. It is an impossibility because something cannot cause itself into existence. Because for something to cause something into existence, it needs to exist beforehand. And even if it is said that the Maya was always causing itself, i.e. Brahman, into existence, then it affirms duality. As for something to even cause itself, there needs to be an affirmation of a cause and the self. That it is held by the Hindus that the cause is always identical to the Brahman, then nothing happens in reality. There is no cause, no effect, as no causer is causes and effect. If all three are the same, meaning the causer, the cause, and the effect, then it is said that the effect is caused by the effect itself, as the effect is. But that is an impossibility because ontologically the effect comes after the cause, because the effect and the cause are not ontologically the same. Because, as we said, the cause precedes the effect ontologically. We asked, did the effect come after the cause ontologically? Of course they will say no. Then we ask, does it come before? But they will have to say no because they are ontologically the same, meaning Brahman is everything. Then it is self-refuting. Then it is refuted because it is impossible for the effect and the cause to be ontologically. Hence, Advaita Vedanta is refuted. This is a very easy refutation, and this kind of philosophy, a completely monistic philosophy, would confuse some people that it is monotheistic. But this is not what monotheism just means. If you invoke anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you invoke anyone other than the one that is worthy of worship, it is a pagan religion. It is still paganism, it is still shirk. Similarly, these Hindus are willing to invoke others. They are willing to invoke the manifestations. They are willing to invoke their so-called avatars, which are not God. They are not worthy of worship. Even though in their philosophy they believe that there is only one thing that exists and hence there is only one God. But they invoke other than that. They invoke other than the one true God, even in their own philosophy, because it is manifestation. Hence, it is still shirk and paganism. So with that being said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.